The most sensational and well-known lizard man report was made by Christopher Davis, a 17-year-old local who claimed he encountered the creature while driving home from work late at night on June 29, 1988. Davis had stopped on a road bordering Skateboard Swamp in order to change a tire, and as he was finishing, he heard a thumping noise from behind him. He turned around to see a frightening-looking creature running at him. Here is Davis's account. As I was finishing tightening the bolts on the tire, I looked back and saw something running across the field towards me. It was about 25 yards away, and I saw red eyes glowing. I ran into my car, and as I locked it, the thing grabbed the door handle. I could see him from the neck down, the 3 big fingers, long nails, and green, rough skin. It was strong and angry. I turned my car and stepped on the gas. As soon as I did this thing jumped on the roof of my car. I heard it grunt and scream, and then I saw its fingers through the front windshield. They were curled around the roof. I sped up and swerved to shake the creature off. Finally jumped off. As I sped up, I looked in my rear mirror. I could see this thing still running after me as it became a blur of green. Davis went to the Lee County Sheriff's Office on July 16, 1988, and filed a report with Sheriff Liston Truesdale after hearing of another similar encounter that had been reported. On the morning July 14, 1988, 2 days before Davis's report, deputies made their way to the residence of Tom and Mary Way, located in a small rural community known as Browntown on the outskirts of Bishopville, South Carolina. The couple showed the officers the vehicle they claimed had been mauled. The chrome molding had been torn away from around the fenders, the sidewall tires were scratched, the hood ornament was broken off, the antenna was bent, and upon closer inspection it appeared that parts of the molding had actually been chewed, as if an animal had used its teeth to inflict the damage. The Ways pointed out clumps of reddish-colored hair and muddy footprints that had been left all over the car. News of Sheriff Truesdale's visit spread around the neighborhood, and other locals came forward with their own stories. Truesdale had told reporters later this: "While we were there looking over the situation, we learned that people in the Browntown community had been seeing a strange creature about 7 foot tall with red eyes. Some of them described it as green, but some of them as brown. They thought it might be responsible for what happened to the car." A woman claimed her great-aunt had told her of an experience she had with an amphibian humanoid. One day she was visiting her great-aunt who lived on a rural farm in the southern United States and asked why she always sat on the deck with a fully loaded shotgun near at hand. This is when the elderly woman told of a truly terrifying experience she had in the 50s. She told her that one evening their dogs and farm animals had suddenly all gone nuts, restless, panicked, and making a racket outside. Dogs were barking, pigs were squealing, and it was just an utter cacophony of noise making her think that something was very wrong. She then says she grabbed her shotgun and headed outside to check it out, and that was when she would come face to face with something that would change her forever. The woman states her great-aunt's rather dramatic account as told. She didn't see it immediately, but when she looked toward the barn, she saw a frogman, as she called it, coming up from the big pond on the side of the barn. It was walking towards her. It wasn't that tall. She stood maybe 5 foot 4 inches. This frogman was a little bit taller than her. He had webbed hands and was walking straight to her. She yelled to it to stop, but it kept walking. She stepped off the porch with a double-barrel shotgun and she shot it dead. The blood of the reptilian was green. Her husband heard the shotgun go off. He came outside. They were elderly at this point. When he stepped off the porch, she said, "Look, I killed something. I killed something and it's not human." They walked over to the side of the barn. She and her husband buried the thing. We asked where it was. She said they buried it right where they killed it, near the barn. After they buried it, the animals got quiet again. Her husband told her not to tell anyone of the story. Now the story doesn't even end there. A month later, she says that her husband and her saw a blue UFO fly over their house and land nearby. After which, more of these frog-like creatures came out and headed towards the barn where the dead frogman was buried. The woman stated what happened next. The frogmen came out of the ship and went straight to the mound where the dead frogman was buried. They put their hands over the ground. This dead frogman thing that she had killed came out of the ground. It wasn't alive, it was dead. They took that thing and put it on the ship. They then went over to the pond and then they raised up their hands and a spaceship came out of the pond. They looked at them, the great-aunt and her husband, but didn't say or do anything. They went back on the ship and zoomed back into the sky. That is why she always kept her double-barrel shotgun always next to her. Even when she went out to the chicken coop or anywhere else, she always kept her shotgun with her because they might come back. The witness claims that he had been in a region to go elk hunting, camping along the way in the rugged backcountry. He says that he was doing a run into the town in his vehicle to stock up on supplies. As he drove along the remote, gloomy road, he claims that he came across a man walking along in clothes that were wholly inadequate for the cold weather, waving his arms wildly. When he pulled over to see if the guy needed a ride, the man looked terrified of something and begged the witness to get him out of there. The witness was afraid that the man was in serious trouble, so he let him into the truck. That was when he noticed that the man's clothes were torn and he had scratches over his body. He was also frantically searching the tree line for something unseen out there. The witness asked the man what had happened. When he had gotten some composure, the stranger then came out with a truly freakish tale, which the witness relates. "You okay, buddy?" I asked. He stared at me for a few seconds and just broke down crying like a little kid. "Yeah, but I don't think I'm crazy, man. I just had some shit happen, and I ain't going back there for nothing. I hope the guys are okay." He composed himself some and started to explain. "I'm hunting here with two buddies, and we always hunt below Brook Lanes when we come to Wyoming. Usually we get elk or deer, never go home skunked here. Just love it. I was going along a trail I've been on many times to get to the small overlook to sit a while. It was their turn to push the elk to me. I was almost there when I walked past the stand of 3 trees close together, and on the other side was this huge lizard. It was standing on 2 legs. It was over 6.5 feet tall, gold bronze color with a vest and a short metallic looking briefs. I could tell it was a male. He had a black thing in his clawed hand. Its eyes were like a cat's and it had a tail. I just stood there with my rifle in my hands across my chest. I was looking into the face of death. I just know it. I coughed a little. This thing raised its arm with the black thing so fast I could hardly see it. Something hit my whole body from head to toe and I fell back on the ground. I don't know if I flew or fell, I just went backwards. It came slowly walking up to me. I could hear it, and I could only move my eyes slightly as it came into my view. It just looked down to me, with its mouth slightly open, making a low hissing sound. Its forked tongue slightly came out of its mouth. Its head turned down, looking at me. I could hear its breathing, seeing the nose holes expanding. I could see its chest muscle tensing and relax. I was frozen there looking up. I couldn't look at it directly, and I couldn't close my eyes either. Its expressions never changed, only the eyes moved, sometimes slow-like, and sometimes so fast you could hardly see him. It finally walked away down the trail. I don't know how long I lay there. From the movement of the sun, I would say a couple hours. I could hear the forest sounds, birds, wind, trees, animals going about their day like nothing happened. I started to try to move my arms or legs, hell, even my fingers. When I could finally move, every muscle in my body ached like after a workout at a gym. I knew if I went downhill, I would come to the old creek bottom and hopefully not see that thing again. I heard something follow me when I first got up. It was really heavy sounding and would stop when I stopped. Once or twice I could hear breathing, the same breathing like that thing did, kind of raspy wheeze sound. That's when I took off running. I followed the path to the canyon bottom and then to the road when I saw you. Thanks again, and please don't make me get out. I hope Jake and Bobby are okay. He told me which hotel to let him off at, and I did. He thanked me many times and got out and went in the office. I never saw him again. I thought about the fantastic story and wondered if it was true. I didn't hear anything about someone having problems anywhere around that fall. In 1977, Sherry Hinckley lived in the outskirts of Henderson, Nevada, and she recalled a strange encounter reported by her 13-year-old son Mark and a friend who were exploring near the slopes of Black Mountain. The area is dotted with abandoned mines and caves, and the place was off limits to the boys. But boys being boys, they decided to explore the area anyway. This is Cherry's account told by her. They hiked maybe 1 mile across the desert and climbed the little hills in front of Black Mountain. On the back side of one of the little hills, Mark and Harry located a cave. They had to squirm into the narrow opening and belly crawl through the cave to the larger room. They turned on their small pocket flashlights. They saw a circular room roughly 9 feet across. Near the back wall, they spotted a large, deeper hole. They found several large branches that someone had dragged and tossed into the hole, creating a makeshift ladder to climb down into the lower pit. The room had occasional debris littered all over the rocky floor, like a tin can or two, a battery teen magazine perched on a small outcrop of a rock that served as a shelf. The boys explored the main room, then turned their attention to the shorter tunnel. They heard the sound of voices and maybe the distant humming of machines. Intrigued by the thought of mining nearby, the boys went deeper into the tunnel. On the far end, they found a rusty metal door, and near the door a strange metal rod. The 1-foot rod was lightweight and resembled aluminum, with a cap on one end and a few strange engravings on one side. Suddenly the boys heard guttural, harsh voices talking, and the sound of approaching footsteps. The boys became frightened as the vocalizations sounded strange and abnormal, not what you'd expect a person to sound like. The boys, not wanting to see whatever was making those sounds, hightailed to the makeshift ladder and headed up toward the cave entrance on the upper level. As they exited, they heard what sounded like the metal door opening with a high screeching sound. They crawled out of the tunnel opening and ran away from the cave entrance. Thinking they were safe, they breathed a sigh of relief. Without warning, they heard a loud, threatening scream. Henry and Mark looked back at the cave entrance, and to their horrified eyes, they watched as a very large, greenish humanoid struggled to force his body out of the narrow cave. The boys, horrified, screamed and started running down the slope of the hill. They didn't look back until they were back in my yard. The two boys excitedly told Cherry of their encounter and produced the strange metal rod for her to see. The rod was about 1.5 inches across, maybe a foot long, with a slight indentation at one end and a plain gray cap on the other. I looked at the bizarre symbols engraved in a 3-inch section of the rod. It was just symbols from spirals, circles of different sizes, a few triangles, and a few unknown symbols. There were no levers or buttons, and the cap at the end didn't move. The rod, with its professional creative symbols and smooth to the touch, I knew it was not a toy, but nothing I recognized. One would think that this would be the end of the encounter, but as it turns out, according to Cherry, the lizard man wanted his rod back. After the excitement of the encounter, it was difficult to get Mark and her other 3 kids to bed, but after some convincing, they went to their bedroom to get a good night's rest. Then the nightmarish events began, and this is what she said. It must have been around 2 in the morning when Mark shook me awake, whispering harshly that someone was trying to get into his bedroom window. I hoped it was just a nightmare or his nerves were still on edge. Quietly we slipped into his bedroom and listened to the sounds of scraping at the window edge. He was not mistaken. In the light of the moon, I could make out a silhouette, head and shoulders of a man. I was alone with my 4 kids, no husband to protect us. I grabbed my flashlight, quickly tossed the curtains open to face the man. There was a glare from the flashlight on the window, but past the glare I could clearly see a large head with ridges on the top, other ridges on its cheekbones, and the glow of golden eyes. Mark and I stood still, unmoving. Both fear and shock kept us frozen. The lizard man didn't move either, his hand still poised in his attempt to pry the window open. His hands were large, with webbed, rough, gnarly-looking fingers with powerful claws. After a couple of minutes, not seconds, but long, agonized minutes with our hearts pounding, I knew I had to do something. One hand still holding the flashlight beam on his face, and my eyes still locked into those golden eyes, I fumbled around the dark with my other hand, hoping to find something to use as a weapon. He glanced at my hand, looking back into my eyes. He turned his head a little as if he was asking a question. He slightly opened his lips, displaying 4 of his pointed teeth, and suddenly he turned and ran off into the desert. Later in the morning, we decided that the reason the lizard man was breaking in the house was to reclaim that metal rod. Mark and I hiked back to the cave and placed the strange rod beside the cave entrance. That was the last we saw him.